Melanie's parties were famous, not just throughout the country, but the world over. Everyone who was anyone wanted to be seen at her summer party in the Hamptons, but the party that was held at her secluded cabin in the northeast was for those who didn't want to be seen. A special occasion held in late summer, before the notorious weather drew in. Melanie jokingly referred to it as the main event, and the guest list was very exclusive. There was no doubt that more world-changing decisions were agreed over this one weekend than were decided by contesting any election, or even fighting any war. With the deals done and the influence spread, Sunday evening was for letting off some steam, and the guests were certainly doing that. Bright lights and music oozed from the timber walls of Wingard Cottage, permeating the peaceful night air outside. Melanie, however, was preoccupied. Her visit to Africa to collect that which was stolen still disturbed her. Not the recovery of the artefact, that had been done countless times over many millennia, although this was the first time in decades. But her experience with Shango and the Fathers remained with her. She knew they were angry, and the subsequent slaughter at the Sacred Groves was no surprise to her. But she also felt something more, a deeper hatred. Her fine clothes and manicured looks cut a contrasting figure against the wild grounds and tall trees to the rear of the cottage, as she sat and gazed out over the still waters of the lake. The shimmering moonlight danced on the water in time to the bass beats in the background. Melanie breathed in the cool night air and wished that the moment could last forever. It did not. She was snapped back to reality by the silver-headed jackdaw which fluttered down and perched on the lakeshore next to her. The bird cocked its head sideways whimsically, fixed Melanie with its black eye, and let out a loud caw. "Really?" Melanie replied, raising an eyebrow. "This is most inconvenient. And quite ill-advised for the person concerned," she concluded, before taking a deep breath, rising and turning to regard the cottage. An unexpected visitor was most unwelcome, but she had something in the boathouse that would bring the matter to a swift conclusion. As she turned and strode away from the cottage, a cold wind started to blow through the surrounding trees. Nkanyamba looked down from the hill to the glow of the lights shining through the trees that stood tall and beautiful in the moonlight. He could hear the music. The debauchery inside the humble dwelling was already starting to make his anger rise. He took a deep breath and knelt, laying his sacred trumbash knives in front of him. He bowed his head to speak to the Fathers. "Command me, Fathers. Our son." The voice rang back into his head, that of the Sacred Fathers of the Holy Groves, descendants of Shango, the first man, the collective souls of his ancestors. He was their avenger, their chosen warrior, selected to punish the defilers that had fouled and spoiled the earth over which they had been given rule. "We were promised dominion. We have been betrayed. She has allowed the blasphemers to thrive. Encourage them. Embolden them. We must take what is ours. She must be destroyed. Then we will rule over them. Balance must be restored. Nkanyamba. It shall be done, Fathers. Be careful, our son. She is powerful. She is deceitful. You must strike fast. Kill them. Kill them all. Nkanyamba." "Yes, Fathers." The Avenger stood from his prayer, picking up the deadly sickle-shaped trumbash knives. The ornately carved bone handles pulsed with energy in his hands. The razor-sharp blades seemed to sing to him with their desire for blood. The ghostly white bone mask he wore, part of the tribal outfit of his ancestors adorned ornately with fur and feather, glowed eerily in the bright moonlight. He holstered the holy weapons on his back and slipped silently down the hill towards the cottage. As the Avenger approached the cottage, Melanie reached the boathouse. She paused momentarily, honing her senses, listening. Music, laughter. "Come here!" The unmistakably rough voice of Bernard Bentram pierced the air as he grabbed at one of the two floozies he had brought with him. "My God, what's happening to us?" The giggling voice from the kitchen rang out. Obviously the complimentary hallucinogens were in full effect. She concentrated harder, blocking out the sounds of the party. Nothing. The intruder was good. He must have been good to get past the heavy security cordon, but to avoid Melanie's sensors, he would have to have been silent, like the night. Unlikely as it was that she would need assistance, she nevertheless called out with her mind. Black wings started to flutter in the surrounding woodland as she took the shotgun from the cabinet in the boathouse and turned to head back towards the cottage. Inkanyamba said one last prayer as he stood at the door to the dwelling. The pumping music was banging in his head like a war drum. He purposefully unsheathed the knives and slowly opened the door, recoiling at the stench of sweat that flooded out from the foyer. The hedonistic music punched into his head. His anger rose once more. Immediately in front of them was one of them, a defiler, fat, sweaty, putrid. The Avenger immediately saw the blackness of the man's soul, stealing the lights from around him, just as his kind steal the life from the earth. "They must be punished, our son," the voices rang in his head. As the door opened, the man looked upon the new arrival. The silhouette of the Avenger in his glorious tribal outfit was illuminated by the moonlight. Delighted, the man grinned. He raised his arms, the whiskey in his glass spilling to the floor as he approached the Avenger. "Well, howdy," the fat man bellowed cheerfully in his southern drawl. "Come in, my son. I must say, I like the outfit," he finished, throwing his arms around the Avenger. There was a slight pause before the man's eyes started to fade. The drool of blood beginning to spill from his mouth signalled that all was not well. He staggered backwards, in doing so wrenching the blade of the trumbash from his bloated stomach, spilling its contents onto the wooden floorboards of the foyer. Without a word, the large body of the Vice President slumped to the floor with a thud. From the trees, beady black eyes looked on as Inkanyamba stared passively at the body. He snapped his head to the left as the raucous laughter coming from the adjacent room caught his attention. Turning and striding towards the noise, the Avenger burst into the dimly lit family room to see 3 defilers dancing, their foul bodies writhing like beasts entwined. His knives moved quickly, slicing through the air, decapitating the blonde one with a flourish. Her pretty head momentarily perched on her body before falling with agonising sloth, allowing the geyser of blood to redecorate the room. Her dance partners froze for a second, then screamed and ran, bursting through the door into the kitchen as Inkanyamba carefully cleaned his sacred knife before turning to smash the record player that was bellowing the unholy noise. He then turned slowly to pursue. Melanie heard the ear-piercing scream in the air. "God damn it," she muttered to herself, and picked up the pace towards the house. She paused momentarily as the vision came into her head. Cast from the black eyes of her allies, the shape moved through the house. It was not clear as to what exactly it was, but this was no chance intruder. She could not let it ravage the house and her guests. Concentrating, she found the intruder with her mind. A wry smile formed across her lips as she flooded his mind with visions, taunting him with insults. She then calmed herself, lowered the shotgun, and waited. Inkanyamba strode towards the door of the kitchen. He could hear them inside, lots of them. His fathers would be pleased. His knife sang to him, thirsty for the blood of the defilers. As his hand reached out for the door, a voice rang in his head. "You have failed," it taunted. Inkanyamba stopped. His anger rose. "You cannot defeat me," the voice continued. Inkanyamba spun. Where was she? "You are weak." He spun again, looking for the voice, flailing his knives. "Come and fight me, coward." The final taunt was followed by a vision. A girl, frail, yet somehow familiar to him, stood in the moonlight by a lake, nearby. The Avenger let out a bellow, smashed the door to the kitchen and strode straight past the pair of defilers covered in blood from the carnage in the family room, and the room's other bemused occupants. He didn't give any of them a second glance as he burst out of the adjacent doorway into the cool air of the grounds outside the rear of the dwelling. The group in the kitchen stood frozen as he passed. Was it a fever dream? The one sober enough to think with some kind of logic locked the door from the kitchen as he left. There was no escape. Perhaps they could hole up. Perhaps Melanie had security on the way. At least that's what he hoped. The couple cavorting in the shadows outside the kitchen barely looked up as the Avenger strode past them with purpose. He was blind to the dark shadows gathering in the trees surrounding him. His only thoughts were that of the girl and the vengeance he would wreak on her. He stopped and looked around. There she was. He adjusted his grip and turned the blades of his sacred knives to face his tormentor. Then he began to break into a jog, closing the distance to his prey with speed. Justice would be swift. His father's prize would be delivered. Then he would dispatch the rest of them. The colours in his peripheral vision began to blur as he focused on his prize, picking up the pace. Then there was a loud bang. White-hot heat ripped at the side of him, and blood flew from his torso as the pellets of the shotgun tore at his midriff. He staggered sideways, then swiftly fell to the floor, avoiding the second volley of shot that flew over his head. Damn! Melanie cursed as she threw the shotgun to one side and looked towards the prone intruder. Then the crows came, as if from nowhere. Their black mass of wings and beaks descended on Nkanyamba, pecking at him with ferocity. His ghostly mass protected him from the bulk of their attack, but their assault was relentless. Sharp beaks and claws tearing at his flesh. The searing pain fed his boiling anger. Melanie gazed on casually, trying to get a good look at her quarry. At the rear of the cottage, the cavorting couple had stopped their fumbling, disturbed by the noise. They now looked upon the scene, laughing at the Avenger as he flailed, fighting off the mass of birds. "Use your anger, son," the voice rang in Nkanyamba's head. "The defilers. They disrespect you. Take their blood. Use your anger," his fathers advised. Nkanyamba focused, letting the anger deep inside him raise to the surface. He swatted away the attacking birds, rolled to the side and sprang to his feet. His gaze turned towards the pair outside the house. Their black souls called to him as he broke into a sprint, leaving the girl looking on as he disappeared into the blackness of the night towards his new prey. "Samuel?" Melanie said to no one in particular. She waved her hands upwards, sending the crows retreating to the trees as the intruder disappeared from view. Then there was only darkness. The call of a solitary raven cut through the air where Melanie once stood. As Nkanyamba approached the pair of defilers, their expression changed. He could see the amusement turn to fear as he slowed his advance. Hey there," the tall one said. "Look, I'm not sure you realise who I am," he continued, his palms out towards the advancing killer. "Look, I can pay. Anything. Anything you want, I can get it," he continued, backing up against a nearby tree. His partner shielded to the side of him. Nkanyamba stopped and regarded the man, his bald head shimmering in the moonlight as his jaw flapped, amused the Avenger. "See? Good, you see sense," the man concluded, breaking into an affable smile. "Now tell me, what do you want?" he asked. Nkanyamba momentarily took his eyes off the crows that had begun to gather in the trees and took a good look at the grinning man in front of him. He was just like the others, if anything, even more foul. His sense of entitlement oozed from his pores, leaving a foul taste in the Avenger's mouth. Nkanyamba gently raised his sickle blade and placed the point just beneath the man's chin, keeping a watchful eye on the murder of crows that was growing in number. "Hey, now I thought—" the bald man started to speak, stopping as Nkanyamba placed a little more pressure on the knife as its blade began to bite, causing a single drop of blood to fall, shimmering in the moonlight. Sweat began to form on the man's brow. The impassive mask of his tormentor seemed to dare him to speak again. The man could hold out no more. "Now look," he started to say. There was a dull squelch as Nkanyamba drove the point of his holy knife upwards just a few inches. "Ugh," the man tried to continue, opening his mouth, only to see his severed tongue drop to the floor. The writhing remainder of the muscle in his mouth twisted and splattered the Avenger's ghostly mask with bright red blood. The boy next to him screamed. Nkanyamba swiped with his second knife, quickly slicing the boy's throat. He turned his attention back to the talker and cocked his head, as if daring him to continue to speak. In the trees above him, the crows grew thicker, watching. With the knife still at the man's throat, Nkanyamba reached down with his second knife, gently placing it at the man's groin. The bald man's eyes changed, pleading. A tear began to roll from them. His tongueless mouth tried to say, as the Avenger gently pressed the razor into the man's groin, deftly flicking his wrist and severing the defiler's manhood. The fluttering of the raven landing beside him led the Avenger to finish the job quickly. To the accompaniment of the muffled screams emerging from the man, the Avenger pushed both knives deeper and simultaneously drew them together. They met in the middle with a muffled clang, almost splitting the man atwain. Nkanyamba withdrew the knives, along with most of the man's innards, and slowly turned as the body slumped to the ground behind him. As the Avenger turned, the black raven transformed back into the girl. She stood before him, unafraid. Her smartly cropped blonde hair seemed to glow in the light. The Avenger tightened the grip on his knives. Clouds gathered across the lake as dark lightning began to echo through the air. "Samuel? Samuel Ajo?" Melanie asked. Nkanyamba tilted his head. His mind whirred. Maybe once, but no more. "No," Nkanyamba answered. "I am Nkanyamba, the vengeance of my fathers." The lightning continued to crack behind him. "I see," Melanie continued, looking down at the bloody corpse beside Nkanyamba. "Do you realise who that was?" she asked of the intruder. The white mask stared back impassively, and the Avenger's hands clenched the knives tighter with a pulsing grip. "So, this is what was chosen, is it? An Avenger. Judge, jury and executioner. How cliché. Let me guess. You sense their auras? Read their thoughts? See the blackness in their souls?" Inkanyamba sprang at her enraged. She danced sideways, leaving him to slice at thin air. "Ah, souls it is then. And there's blackness in everyone, isn't there, Avenger?" she teased as he circled her like a caged animal. "Do you wish to see mine?" she asked. Inkanyamba sprang at her again in fury. His knife sliced an intricate pattern through the air in front of him as he closed on the girl. Melanie stepped backwards as he came at her. Time seemed to slow. Inkanyamba's vision was blinded as the shape of the girl burst with a bright white light. He stopped, shielding his eyes. Then the colours changed. She began to pulse with the colours of the rainbow. White turned to red, to green, to blue. Each pulse of colour hit Inkanyamba like a sledgehammer to the head. He stumbled backwards. Melanie's light show finally subsided. As Inkanyamba regained his senses and looked up at her, she turned black, blacker than anything that he had ever seen before. Her soul seemed to suck the light from all around. Inkanyamba flew at her with a fury never seen. The holy knives split the air, true and pure. Then their target was gone. In its place again the raven. But this time Melanie was not fast enough. The trumbash sliced the wing of the bird as the Avenger unleashed his fury. The raven crashed to the floor, and the Avenger advanced. His knives poised to finish the creature as it floundered on the leafy sodden ground. Then the crows came again, swarming from the trees and attacking. Blindly he swatted at them, his blades whirring and cutting them from the sky. The raven shapeshifted again, and Melanie stood, looking at the blood-stained arm of her green Louis Vuitton coat. She turned purposely to the fight between the crows and the Avenger, just as the yelling came from the kitchen. "Is Tammy home? I repeat, is Tammy home?" The frantic yelling came from the kitchen of the cottage. "Damn politicians and their stupid code words," Melanie thought to herself, turning back from her distraction to finish the job. Only to find Inkanyamba gone, the crows scuffling between themselves and pecking at their dead brethren. Melanie looked around, but he was nowhere, vanished like a ghost. She sighed and stormed back to the kitchen as the crows once again retreated to the trees. "Is Tammy home?" The rather well-spoken lady was still yelling as Melanie burst through the door into the kitchen. She cut a sorry figure, limping, her fine clothing stained with blood. The Prime Minister looked up at her, her eyes wild. "Melanie, thank God, there's a madman here. I'm trying to get help," she continued, picking up the coffee mug and yelling, "Is Tammy home? I repeat, is Tammy home?" Melanie grabbed the mug from the woman and smashed it to the floor. She turned to the Prime Minister, grabbed her collar and one-handedly lifted her from the floor. Fixing the woman with black eyes, Melanie calmly said, "Madam Prime Minister, you're obviously high. That radio was a coffee mug. There is no need to call for help because there is no intruder. Am I clear?" She finished. Well, the Prime Minister spluttered. Melanie tightened her grip, twisting the collar on the Prime Minister's blouse. "Am I clear?" Yes," the Prime Minister choked. Melanie blinked, her eyes turned back to their radiant blue colour, and she lowered the Prime Minister to the floor gently. "Excellent," she proclaimed, beaming with a wide smile, before beginning to dust herself down and clean the blood from her coat with a handkerchief. "Now perhaps you should have some more drugs while I go and take care of this," she concluded, gesturing to a large selection of pharmaceuticals laid out on the table. "A fine idea," the Prime Minister said, helping herself to a handful of quaaludes. Melanie looked round the 5 figures in the kitchen. 2 were covered head to toe in blood. She immediately recognised them as Bentram, cowering against one of the cupboards, and one of his floozies, who was passed out on the floor next to him. The British Prime Minister was now sitting in the corner shaking and talking to herself. And the remaining pair, businessman Miguel Esperanto and his current wife, were obviously so high they had no idea that anything was amiss. They were simply sitting on the flagstone floor in the corner of the room, giggling and pointing. Melanie shook her head in despair, grabbed one of the cut crystal tumblers from the counter and poured herself a large glass of whiskey, downing it in one before turning to Bentram, who seemed to be the most lucid of the bunch. "Stay here and do not let any of these clowns leave the room. Am I understood?" she said forcibly. Bentram nodded. "Good," Melanie concluded, before pouring herself another whiskey, shaking her head again, taking a deep breath and heading out into the adjoining family room. Dear God, she muttered to herself as she stepped over the decapitated blonde that adorned the room. The carpet was completely ruined. 5th century Ottoman. A gift from the President of Turkey. The thing would now have to be burnt. Such a shame. Now where the hell was he? She mused, taking a sip from the glass. Nkanyamba crouched in the shadows between the trees, hidden. His gaze fixed upon the house. The unholy birds could not see him, his body stung in pain from their attacks, his eyes still blinded from the unnatural light of the girl as her soul burst. He had been unprepared. What was she? He must speak again with his fathers. He laid his knives at his feet and lowered his head. "Fathers," he prayed. "Son," came the reply. "I have failed you," Nkanyamba continued. "She is too strong. No, son. She must be stopped. She will destroy. We were promised dominion. She is magical. I do not know how to defeat her, fathers. She is old, son, ancient and powerful, but she can be defeated. You must use your wrath, son. We have no power here. The power must come from within you. Use your rage, son. Use your strength. Unleash your divine wrath, the wrath of the defilers. You can defeat her in Nkanyamba. We must have dominion. Her arrogance will be her undoing, son." Nkanyamba took a deep breath. He could not fail his fathers. All depended on it. He would not fail. He would fight until the end, until the last of them were defeated and balance was restored. "Yes, fathers." Nkanyamba concluded his prayer, gathered his sacred knives and once again advanced towards the cabin to grant the justice his fathers desired. Beneath the ghostly white bone mask his eyes burned with hatred and vengeance. As Melanie emerged from the kitchen, she heard the front door to the cottage creak open. "There you are," she thought to herself. The Avenger hadn't seen her. She slunk back into the shadows of the darkened room, holding back the gathering crows. She could almost taste the anger radiating from the ghostly figure. He was somehow channeling the wrath of his fathers. A noise from the adjoining laundry room made the figure turn and quickly head away from her. Melanie followed, unseen. She heard the screams of Geoffrey Jones, entrepreneur, as he succumbed to the flurrying knives of the Avenger. Melanie stood almost mesmerised, watching, as his knives twirled through the air like a majorette's baton, only with a more bloody and deadly conclusion. There was no quarter given, no chance to atone, just a whirl of death decorating the laundry room bright red, mesmerising and beautiful. Her pulse quickened as he turned towards her. Had he seen? No. Another noise drew him towards the garage as his fickle temper once again began to flare. Melanie again slunk behind, sipping her whiskey which left a silky sheen on her lips. Her heart skipped a beat as he again released his fury. The red blood now adorned every part of him, contrasting against his beautiful dark skin, dripping seductively from his deadly knives. Her breathing deepened as she looked upon the carnage. Her body began to tingle. The crows were clamouring. She felt their impatience but held them back. She could finish him now, despite his strength, deny his wrath of opportunity. But why should she? She was beginning to enjoy the show. He certainly was magnificent. And what were these people anyway to beings like the two of them? Pawns that could be replaced with ease. Her heart beat like a drum as he turned towards her. Once again she slipped back into the shadows and took another sip on her whiskey. She closed her eyes as he passed, close enough to touch. The smell of blood and sweat on his skin oozed into her nostrils, feeding her senses. He stopped momentarily as he felt her breath on his neck, but she again had slunk back from him. He turned, but could see nothing in the dim light, and continued towards his prey. As she stepped out behind him, she breathed in deeply. The hairs on her neck began to prick. He was truly beautiful. She followed him towards the kitchen, remaining unseen. Nkanyamba strode purposefully towards the only remaining sound in the cottage. Everything else was obscured from him. His rage showed no bounds. His tunnel vision blocked out the girl in the shadows as he passed her, his knives poised to feed on the few souls that remained. As he entered the kitchen, he saw them. Every kill had made him stronger. His rage was infinite. His task was clear: to finish them, destroy them, then find the girl, whatever she was, and destroy her. He would not be denied. The blubbering woman was the first to die. The nonsense spilling from her lips ceased as the two blades sliced simultaneously across her midriff. The others ran. 3 of them smashed through the door to the darkness outside. The remaining one spilled in the other direction. Beneath the mask, the Avenger smiled slightly and set off in pursuit of the 3 that had fled into the grounds of the cottage. Melanie looked upon the scene in the kitchen, her body tingling. As the Avenger's knives flashed mesmerically, spraying yet more blood across the small room, her hand reached down, her breathing became heavier. It was so long since his body had felt pleasure. She was almost in a trance as the Prime Minister fell to the floor, her weak body finally put to peace by the almost godlike force confronting her. Suddenly she was snapped back to reality as Bentram's floozy crashed into her, fleeing from the kitchen. Melanie grabbed the wrist of the girl and flung her to the side. She hit her head on the bookcase and knocked herself out. Looking back to the kitchen, Melanie sees Esperanto and his wife finally snapping out of their drug-induced stupor to break from the kitchen outside, with Bentram following quickly afterwards. She winces as the crows descend, ripping Esperanto's eyes from their socket as his wife's screams permeate the night air. Nkanyamba turns to her and they lock eyes. Melanie smiles and raises the glass to him before draining the remainder of the contents. It is time. Nkanyamba sees the girl. She is smiling. His rage is uncontrolled. She will pay, but first the others. He steps from the kitchen into the cold night air. Lightning lights the sky as thunder brooms across the lake. Looking down, he sees the man, his eyes missing. The accursed birds have again retreated to the trees, their anger momentarily sated. His knives flash as he theatrically cuts the air to finish the screaming woman whose cries are tearing at his senses. Every time he unleashes his wrath, his body heals, becoming stronger, another gift of his father's. Feeling a presence behind him, he turns slowly. The girl, arrogant. It is time. He knows he cannot be stopped. Melanie steps from the blood-soaked kitchen into the night air. Her slow clap makes the Avenger turn. "Bravo, Avenger," she says, bowing theatrically. "I am Nkanyamba," the Avenger retorts. "Sword of my fathers, deliverer of their justice. You will be destroyed, Raven." He continues, prowling round Melanie like a caged animal. "Oh, I know of your fathers, Nkanyamba. They and I are old friends." "You lie, Raven. You have stolen from the fathers, denied them. You will pay what is owed." "Oh? You have allowed the defilers to destroy. We will bring back balance." "Then let us settle this," Melanie finishes, springing at Nkanyamba. The Avenger dances sideways, swinging his knife upwards, catching Melanie's arm with the razor blade. She glances down at her wound, her eyes flash black as she turns her attention back to Nkanyamba. The crows are again clamouring in the trees, but she holds them back. This is between the two of them. Melanie steps backward as the Avenger flies at her with his knives. She grabs the unsuspecting Bentram, who has been cowering at the foot of the tree since fleeing the kitchen, and flings him towards the intricate mesh of whirring blades. The knives make short work of the businessman, his body unrecognisable by the time it hits the sodden floor. Thunder cracks as Nkanyamba again springs at Melanie, forcing her to sidestep away. Melanie regains her balance and spins deftly, landing a kick of unnatural strength square in the torso of the warrior. Nkanyamba bellows with rage and again counters, his knives flurrying towards Melanie. Again he catches her with the blades. He turns to follow up the attack, just as a swarm of crows descend from the trees. The Avenger flails, blades whirring, slicing the black pennies from the sky. Their bodies drop at her feet. The attack of the crows gives Melanie time to right herself. She peels off her blood-stained coat, tutting and dropping it to the floor. "I must say I'm a little disappointed," she taunts as Nkanyamba swats away the last of the crows and turns to face her. "I was hoping for more of a match," she continues. His rage flares again and he springs. Melanie drops to one knee and delivers an unnaturally strong punch to the midrib of the Avenger as he sails over her, shattering his ribs. Nkanyamba lands in a heap. Channeling his wrath, he stands, his bones already beginning to re-knit. The crows descend again. This time Nkanyamba is ready. He weaves under their flock and flies at Melanie. Hidden by the murder, the girl does not see the attack coming. Nkanyamba's dual knives slice Melanie across the stomach. Blood soaks her silk blouse. Melanie screams. Her adrenaline is now coursing. Nkanyamba catches her eyes. Their piercing blue colour almost seems to crackle with electricity. He hesitates. The momentary distraction is enough for Melanie. She unleashes a furious strike on Nkanyamba. Blow lands square on his chest, the unholy power of the strike breaking almost every bone in his upper body. The Avenger sinks to the floor, broken. Melanie stands and looks down at the body of her foe, wipes the blood from her face and regains her composure. The crows look down from the trees as she blows the Avenger a kiss and turns to walk back towards the cottage. "Son," the voice echoes in his head. "You must fight. We grant you the strength." Nkanyamba once again feels his bones knitting as he rises from the floor, his broken body healing from the power of his fathers. He stands and slowly turns towards the girl. Her back is turned. Her arrogance will be her undoing. His mind recalls the words of his fathers. The Avenger slowly raises his holy knives and brings them down in a lightning-fast arc towards the head of the unsuspecting Melanie. But the knives do not connect. They instead swipe unoppose through the air. In the blink of an eye, Melanie has spun. Catching the Avenger completely unprepared, she delivers a blow square to the face of Nkanyamba, sending him reeling backwards and again crashing to the ground. His bone mask dislodges and spills to the sodden, leafy floor, leaving the rage-filled eyes of the Avenger staring up at the girl towering over him. "Enough!" Melanie's voice rings through the night. "You wish to see your fathers? Then I shall show you." Her blue eyes fade to pure white and begin crackling with energy as the goddess Viracocha, creator of life, reveals herself. She bends down and gently places the flat of her hand on Nkanyamba's forehead. All his senses leave him as visions come flooding to the Avenger. A cave, pitch dark, yet somehow he can see, as if the cave were lit by a magical glow that dances, casting mystical shadows. An altar, ornate and ancient, and a man, a tall African man, his naked body glistening in the magical light as he approaches the altar, tentatively, afraid. Nkanyamba sees as if he is there. He tastes the air of the cave, somehow sweet and inviting. The man bends down to the altar and reaches out, scooping up the sacred waters that were to give life to the holy groves, somehow holding them in his hand. "This is your father's," Melanie's voice echoed through Nkanyamba's head. "Stealing from us, as many others have stolen over the millennia." "No, Nkanyamba," the groves called to their son. "She tricks. We did not steal. We were invited." Melanie stepped backwards. She held her arms to the side as the body lifted from the floor. The lightning, that was before only in her eyes, begins to crackle throughout her entire body. The sky around Wingard Cottage erupts in a ball of light as the full power of the goddess channels through the sky. "Silence!" The voice rings through the air at the sacred site in Africa as the sunlit sky turns black, as millions upon millions of birds descend on the sacred groves, beginning to tear the vegetation and foul the sacred waters. The groves cry in pain. Nkanyamba falls backwards and clasps his hand to his head. "You dare challenge me?" Melanie's voice rings out. "You send your Avenger? For me?" The birds continue to rip and tear at the groves. Nkanyamba writhes in agony on the floor. "You promised us." "I promised nothing," Melanie boomed. "And I shall ensure you receive it in abundance." Every inch of the sacred site was now covered in birds of all variety, their ferocity increasing as they continued to tear at the groves. "You act like the petulant child that you are," Melanie continued. "We are sorry, Viracocha. We have made a mistake. We concede," the groves begged, their strength weakening. "A mistake? We should not have challenged you. We are sorry. Forgive us." In Maine, Melanie lowered her arm. Her body began to slowly fall back down to earth as the lightning coursing through it began to subside. At the groves, the birds began to relent their attack. "We shall not forget this, Shango," Melanie said. "And you shall release your warrior to us." "No, please, he is our son," the groves pleaded. Melanie again lifted her arms. The lightning intensified and the birds once again began to tear at the groves. "Release him, or be destroyed," Melanie said neutrally. There was a pause before the groves finally responded. "As you wish, Viracocha," they conceded. In Maine, the body of Incanyamba stopped convulsing on the floor as Melanie ceased her attack on the groves. As her eyes returned to their striking blue colour, she stood and looked down at the figure on the floor. The man looked up. His eyes no longer held the hatred of the Avenger. Their soft brown hue caught the concerned gaze of the woman standing over him. "Miss Brown?" Samuel said, confused. "Melanie." Samuel smiled weakly. "I have had the most terrible dream," he said, as he looked round at the carnage that surrounded him. "Oh," he continued, "it wasn't..." Melanie shook her head and reached down with her hand toward the man. Samuel grasped it and she pulled him up. "Come, we have much to discuss," she said, gesturing towards the cottage. "I think a drink might be in order, don't you?" "I think that would be a very good idea," Samuel replied. The pair walked towards the cottage, stepping over the bodies as they went. Melanie tutted. "This will take a lot of cleaning up, you know, and that carpet is completely ruined." "I am sorry, Miss Melanie. It looks like Britain will need a new Prime Minister," she mused idly as they walked. "Shame. I did like that one. I'm thinking helicopter crash. That normally does it. Don't you think?" Now, tell me about Incanyamba. There will be a time when he is needed, but you must learn to control Samuel. Without control, rage is just wasted.